Week 11 is officially here, and it is time to fix your bad fantasy football teams. Whether you're suffering with injuries, bye weeks, the whole 9 yards, it is time to make that playoff push. And there's some guys on this week's waiver wire that will help you do so. But before we get into the official top 10, we go through the should-be roster tier. And with these guys, again, I got a lot of feedback on recent waiver videos that you guys want to see where they would rank on this specific list. So I made sure you guys know what, in terms of waiver priority, they would rank in terms of the top 10 if available in your league. So the first two are the San Francisco 49ers wide receivers, Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings. They both would be the #1 overall waiver pickup available this week if they are available in your leagues. We saw what the San Francisco offense wants to do. Both Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall are big-time additions to this piece. And with Christian McCaffrey back, man, this offense looks like it can take full force. Despite missing 3 field goals, had a very impressive showing against Tampa Bay this past week. So if available, again, #1 overall waiver priority. I shouldn't have to explain much further. Jaylen Warren, running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers, is starting to get that workload we expected for him coming to the year. That ended up making him a 9th round, 10th round pick in a lot of your drafts. If he is available in your league, I'd be willing to, again, make him the 1 or 2 on this list pending priority. And then the next 2 guys are Jerry Jeudy of the Cleveland Browns and Mike Gesicki of the Cincinnati Bengals. Both guys would figure in that 3 to 5 range if available in your league. So those are all guys rostered between the 50 to 70% range. That should be rostered in 100% of your leagues. But now we move on to the official top 10 list, starting off with Audric Estime, running back of the Denver Broncos, coming in at 1. He's rostered in 7% of sleeper leagues, and I'd be willing to spend 10 to 20% of my remaining budget on Estime. And with Audric Estime, we finally saw him command a majority workload in this Denver backfield the week after the team said they want to get him more involved moving forward. He was a top 5 running back for me in the 2024 NFL draft, and I think despite running a 4.7, he has that physical between the tackles nature that this Denver offense has sorely lacked so far this year. And with Estime, he's not the best receiver out of the backfield. Like, I don't think he's going to be this, Tyrone Tracy capable 3-down back, I would say. However, if he's handling the first 2 downs, if he's getting spelled on 3rd down for a guy like Jaleel McLaughlin, he still has an RB2 level of appeal, kind of like we've seen Javonte. Just imagine what Javonte's doing right now, but you're getting a guy that's going to be more efficient doing it, like Estime has been all year. So if you're in need of running back help, you need a guy to spot start in the near future with bye weeks, I think Audric Estime is a perfectly fine waiver option to spend that fab budget on. Now we go on to Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts, rostered in 15% of sleeper leagues, another guy I'd be willing to spend 10 to 20% of my fab on. And the only real pause for concern that I do have with AD Mitchell is that technically Michael Pittman has not been placed on IR, so there's a very real possibility he could still take snaps from AD Mitchell moving forward like we saw in the first 9 weeks of the year. However, we finally saw this past week with Pittman out of the lineup, Mitchell become a full-time player, and in that full-time stint, we see 95% of the routes, 17% of the targets, and a top 20 overall finish at wide receiver. He's been their best separator on the team this year, and I definitely think moving forward in the best entrance of the Colts offense, it would be with AD Mitchell on the field. I personally think Pittman's cooked. I think his back is not in a good spot, and I think the Colts would be wise to place him on IR because they haven't done so yet. AD Mitchell ranks at #2, but you can make the case for him being 1, especially if you are in need for a wide receiver in PPR leagues. And speaking of upside wide receiver, next up at 3, we have Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers, rostered in 13% of sleeper leagues. Another guy I'd be willing to spend 5 to 10% of my remaining budget on. And if you have to go a little further, I'd be perfectly fine with doing that because with Jalen Coker, we saw him take a full step forward in terms of his usage. In the last 2 weeks, 80+% of the routes in each of those. And specifically this past week, we saw 93% of the routes and 32% of the targets commanded from the undrafted free agent rookie wide receiver. But if you guys have been following the channel all offseason, if you're following us in the dynasty portion, the NFL draft portion of the year, you would know our thoughts on Jalen Coker. I believe Corey had him as the wide receiver 13. He was my wide receiver 18 in the class. We've always known that this guy could play. I personally didn't think, as bullish as I was on Jalen Coker, that he'd be able to get consistent starting snaps in year 1. Goes to show you the talent was always there. He ended up overcoming that small school status, and I definitely think on this Carolina Panthers offense, he can establish himself as a top 2 target moving forward. And then next up is Trey Benson, running back of the Arizona Cardinals, rostered in 25% of sleeper leagues. Another guy like Coker, I'd be willing to spend 5 to 10% of my budget on. And with Trey Benson, we're finally starting to see some production in a standalone role, but as we know, the main reason why you would want to pick up Trey Benson is the implied value should James Conner go down. However, because he's gotten more work in the last couple of weeks, I do think he's a reasonable pinch start at running back, especially through bye week. So in terms of Trey Benson, his stock is rising. Of course, like I said, a little bit of standalone value, but the main reason you're picking him up is that in the case of James Conner going down, he can win people leagues. So if you can get him right now for 5 to 10% instead of the 100% that could happen if Conner went down, you may as well go get him on your roster already. Next up is Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots, rostered in 44% of sleeper leagues. Again, another guy I'd be willing to spend 5 to 10% of my budget on. And while he only profiles as, a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 moving forward, I think Demario Douglas is the perfect bye week fill-in for these next few weeks. 21% yearly target share, and I think this offense scales up as May continues to improve in the NFL. Number 6 is Rashod Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens, rostered in 32% of sleeper leagues. A guy that, if we tear down, I'd be willing to spend 0 to 5% of my budget on. And if I mentioned Demario Douglas, I view as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. I view Bateman as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. I think he is a quality depth wide receiver in PPR leagues. He's running over 80% of the routes for this team. He's clearly ahead of Deontay Johnson on the pecking order as currently stands, and he's looked good. And again, if I can get a piece, potential number 2 weapon for an MVP year Lamar Jackson, I'm willing to do it with Rashod Bateman. So if he's available in your league, again, through bye weeks, through injuries, you need someone to throw into your lineup. He had 17.7 PPR points this week, and I think there are more weeks coming. Number 7 is Cam Akers, running back of the Minnesota Vikings, rostered in 20% of sleeper leagues, and another guy I'd be willing to spend 0 to 5% of my budget on. He has clearly usurped Ty Chandler as the main number 2 running back for Minnesota, and as we saw this past week, Aaron Jones went down briefly, returned for the game. It is expected that Aaron Jones will play on Sunday, which is why Cam Akers only ranks at 7. However, I do think he's shown himself to be a must-roster handcuff running back. I view Trey Benson as having higher upside given his talent, but I do think should an injury happen to Aaron Jones, older running back, injury history, there's an opportunity Cam Akers could be an RB2 in the fantasy playoffs. But moving on to number 8, we have Gus Edwards, running back of the LA Chargers. And the theme of this video, I guess, is implied upside handcuffs. Because with Gus Edwards, he finally returned from injured reserve. They made Kamani Vidal active, really showing the sign that they trust Edwards over Vidal. And being the RB2 on a run-heavy Chargers offense behind an injury-prone J.K. Dobbins is not a bad gig to have if you're Gus Edwards. Again, I would slightly prefer Cam Akers because of the offense. However, should anything happen to J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards has shown he can be efficient in the NFL, and I think he can be an RB2 in fantasy. And then we move on to 9 and 10, and again, this waiver wire this week is not deep at all. I think the top 8 names pretty much separate from the pack. However, at 9 and 10, we'll just talk about 2 gross receivers in succession. Starting off with Marquez Valdes-Scantling of the New Orleans Saints. He may be a higher priority on some list out there, but I would tread lightly if you do have MVS. I do think he is the big trap of this week. People are going to see 100-plus yards, automatically think MVS has the opportunity to be the number 1 wide receiver in this offense with no Shaheed and no Olave. However, we know what MVS is. He's not a very good player. He's a field stretcher, but every now and then he has a game like this. So if your league mate wants to spend 20% of their fab on MVS, let them do so. If you can get him, 0 to 5%, bye week fill. And again, another guy that I just don't know when I'm ever going to put in my lineup because I simply do not trust his role. But again, if your league mate wants to put 20%, let them have it. If you're desperate for wide receiver help, 0 to 5%, I would not go further than 5% of my budget. And then Elijah Moore comes in at 10, rostered in 16% of sleeper leagues. He's basically just Cleveland Wan'Dale Robinson at this point. Like the efficiency and overall production hasn't been great, but he's commanded 27 targets in the last 3 games. And I hate to spoil it, but in this economy, that absolutely fucking plays. With the amount of injuries, with the amount of bye weeks we're going to have at wide receiver, getting a guy that can average 9 targets per game in his last 3 should be very valuable, like I said, in your PPR leagues. A guy that I would not trust in my lineup, but if I'm forced to, I would be willing to play in it. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. If you want access to our weekly rankings moving forward, there's one of 2 ways to access them right now. First way, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSC. Sign up and first deposit at least $10 on the site. You make 1 play, you'll have access to our weekly rankings manifesto moving forward. And the other way is flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSC will get you 30% off any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial on the site. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck on the waiver wire. Go get your intended targets.